Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about genealogy source checklists. Now, my objective today is not to have you copy exactly what I do. It's just to show you some of the things that I do to keep myself focused in my research, to make sure that I am conducting a reasonably exhaustive search so that you can figure out what works for you. So I'll explain why I use a genealogy source checklist. I'll show you one of mine, and then I'll actually walk you through a working copy of it that I'm using to work on one of my brick walls. As always, if you're watching this live, I will be on chat immediately following the presentation to answer any additional questions you may have. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, just leave a comment down below the video, and we'll be sure to respond to that. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's talk first about why you might want to have source checklists for your genealogy research. First of all, you should be formulating genealogy questions as you do your research. So genealogy questions are things like, when was this particular great-grandfather, when and where was this particular great-grandfather born, or who are the parents of my great-grandmother, Mary Smith, okay? So those are the kinds of questions that you need to be formulating. And I even would go so far as to say write those questions down. It's very easy to get distracted. It's very easy to forget what it is that you're trying to do. It's very easy to even just start attaching records and documents to people without thinking about what it is that you're trying to, what information you need to glean from those particular records. So one of the reasons why I do genealogy checklists is so that I can answer my genealogy questions. So the purpose of the source checklist is to help me figure out what records are going to help me answer that question. So in order to do that, I need to know what records exist. There are a couple, here in the U.S., there are a couple of excellent resources for that. The main ones being the Source and the Red Book. Both of those are available for free on the Ancestry.com Family History Wiki. So if you just go into the Learning Center, the Family History Wiki is going to be the very bottom option there. You're going to see there, let me make this a little bigger. You're going to see the Source and the Red Book. So I can come in here and I can see all of the states. So for example, if I'm interested in Georgia, and then I can come over here and click on any kind of record, and it's going to tell me what records exist for that location for any given time period. So if I want to know when they started keeping birth, marriage, and death records, or if there are, gaps in the federal census for that location, or if there are state censuses, what kinds of court records or probate records or land records, tax records, all of those kinds of things for that particular location are going to be here in the Red Book by state. Now the Source is broken out by record type. So if I want to learn specifically about immigration records or court records or church records or whatever, I can go in and learn about those. Again, all of that is under the Learning Center in the Family History Wiki, and that's for the US. Now, if you're doing research in Canada or the UK or Ireland or Scotland or Germany or France or Italy or anywhere else in the world, you're going to have to get a little bit more creative. There are resources in our Learning Center that will help you learn about those kinds of records. Just click on the Learning Center, try typing in some keywords, Polish immigration or Irish civil registration or Canadian census, and if we've written an article about it or provided some resources about that, it will come up. We also have in the Learning Center here these free research guides. So if you click on that and come in here, you're going to see things like German civil registration or loyalist resources. So for those who fought on the side of the loyalists during the American Revolution, information about religious records or every state. We've been working on state research guides lately. Scroll down a little bit more here. You're going to see Irish resources and UK and Irish and Swedish and German and Canadian. So these free research guides are going to provide you with some additional help. Every one of those is a PDF file, so you can print it out and have it next to you, but also they have clickable links to resources elsewhere on the web that are going to help you answer this question: what records exist? Because one of the things that happens, and let me just talk through this really quickly with you. So when you put your tree online at Ancestry or in Family Tree Maker or both, you get those little shaky leaf hints. And we've talked about these before. There is actually a video that I did a while ago called Going Beyond the Shaky Leaf, where I explain in detail how those are created and why you can't rely solely on the shaky leaf. The short version of that is Ancestry does not hint every single database that we have. We have more than 15 billion records in more than 32,000 different databases. And we only hint about the top 10% of our most popular databases. And even then, we only provide you with that hint if we have a high degree of certainty that that is for your person. So if we can't tell that this census record is for your grandfather because he was going by his middle name and his age was off by 12 years, we're not going to show you that hint. So you look at the hints, then you also have to search. But when you search, you need to know what you're searching for. And so knowing what records exist is an important part or an important step in that. And then once you have an idea of what records exist, you need to know where those records exist. Not all records are available online. So online at Ancestry, we provide you with a card catalog. And that card catalog is found under the search button. So you hover over search, come down here, click on card catalog. You'll see a listing of all 32,497 databases on Ancestry. And then you can filter by record type, by location, and by date. So for example, if you discovered that there was a state census in New York in 1865, you could use your filters to get to that. Or you could just come up here and type in state census, and it's going to show you a list of all 48 state census databases on Ancestry. And then you scroll down until you see the ones for New York State, 1855, 75, 1915, 1925. Okay, so that's how I use the card catalog, is to see what records exist online. Now, when I need a record that's offline, very often I will use online catalogs. So if I need to know, for example, what is held on microfilm at the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, I will go to their website, I will pull up their catalog, and I will search the catalog for the time and place and record type, just like I would the online card catalog. If I wanted to know what the National Archives has and where it's held, same thing, they have an online catalog. Same thing with the National Archives in Canada and the National Archives in the UK. Also very similar to how I would search for local records in a local library. Many libraries have their catalogs online. So if I was interested in newspapers for Fayetteville, Arkansas, I could go to the Fayetteville Library or the Washington County, Arkansas Library website, pull up their catalog, and it would show me what newspapers they have either on microfilm or microfiche that date and how far back they date. So you can quickly get an idea for what records exist offline, and then make a note to yourself that you need to do further research in those records, or that you need to hire somebody who lives near or works in one of those archives to do a record pull for you. So this is the reason why, right? The point is to help keep your research focused, to make sure that you're doing a reasonably exhaustive search. Let me just share with you one of my templates. This is my template for U.S. research. Okay, so I do have a template for UK research and for some of the Eastern European research that I do. Those are the countries that I work in the most. So here is my template for US research. It's very simple. I do it in a spreadsheet, so you can do it in a spreadsheet or a Word doc or OneNote or whatever works for you. I do mine in a spreadsheet because I like the clean look of it and the simple columns and rows. I also like being able to calculate things if I need to. I'm not a big math person, so if I want to quickly calculate something, I can do that right here in my spreadsheet. So in this first column, I have just listed every possible record type that I can think of that I might need in order to do my research in the U.S. Now, I haven't gone so far as to list out every U.S. federal census. So I've just listed, here, let me make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it here. I don't want to make it too big. Well, we'll try it. We'll see how this works. Whoa, way too big. Okay, let's try 150. So I'm going to just, I just want to make sure that you can read this. I also want to make sure, you need to make sure you maximize your screen. That'll help too. Okay, so here I've listed federal census, right? And you look down here and you can see it's my U.S. Checklist. So here I've listed federal census. Now I know, because I've been doing this for a long time, that the U.S. federal census starts in 1790, that it's taken every 10 years, that the 1890 census, most of it was destroyed, and so it's no longer in existence, and that the 1940 census is the most recently available census because there's a 72-year privacy law in the United States. Now, if you're new to this, you might want to just spell that out, right? Just make a little note to yourself, 1790 through 1940 minus 1890, right? However you want to do that so that you know what you're working with, okay? In the UK, for example, there is a 100-year privacy law on census records. So the most recently available census in the UK is 1911. In Canada, there's a 90-year privacy law. So whatever place you're working with records, if you don't off the top of your head know the information about when records are available, or what years they're available for, just make yourself a note. It's really simple. Now, I've listed state census as another category of record that I need. If I was doing a lot of research in one particular state, I might make a note about, so say it was New York State, about what years those records are available. And then I might even further make a note about what records are available online versus offline. So just however it is that you need it to work for you so that you know what records are available or not available. Now, I've listed birth, marriage, and death. These are what we call collectively our vital records as three separate categories here. But here's the thing, right? Again, my experience lends itself and way too much information in my brain to knowing some of this stuff off the top of my head so I don't detail it. But if you need to detail it, then go ahead. Some states in the United States did not start keeping birth records consistently until the 1930s. Okay, so if you're working in a state where birth certificates or marriage certificates or death certificates are not available until the 1900s, you need to know that. Again, make a note. Now, prior to that, there might be a birth register kept at a town or a county level. Again, sometimes you have to dig into the source or the Red Book, dig into the card catalog, see what exists and where those records exist. So just because a state didn't start keeping vital records until the 1900s doesn't mean a birth, marriage, or death record doesn't exist. It just means you might need to get a little bit more creative. It means you might need to look a little further afield or look a little bit more specifically at a particular county or town, either online or offline, to see if they kept records during that time period. Now, birth, marriage, and death records, usually, as we think of them, are going to be very scarce, which means we have to use other records that give us that information. So, as you come down my checklist here, you're going to see things like, I have a whole section on military records, and I've separated them into three categories. Draft records, right, because depending on the time period, not everybody served who was drafted, or not everybody who registered for the draft served. So World War I is the primary example. Any men who were born between 1872 and 1900 who were living in the United States at the time of World War I registered for the draft. I think the estimate is that 98% of them registered for the draft. So if I have a man born in that time period living in the United States during World War I know I should be able to find a draft card for him. Now, just because he registered for the draft does not mean he served in the military. So then I also need to look for military service records. Well, I happen to know that there was a fire at the Military Personnel Records Office in St. Louis in the 1970s, and 80% of the military service records from World War I and World War II were destroyed in that fire. And so I might not be able to find a military service record. So I might need to contact the National Archives and see what other records that they have that denote that my ancestor or relative served in the military. Now, maybe I'm looking for Civil War or Revolutionary War or War of 1812. Maybe I'm looking for loyalists versus patriots, right? So it just depends on the year and the location that I'm focused on. And so I might make notes to myself about what it is that I'm actually looking for. And again, this checklist just reminds me that I need to go see what records exist and where those records are kept. Next, I just have a couple of notations here about immigrants. So I have a naturalization line and an immigration line. And I put them in this order very deliberately. Oftentimes people jump immediately to trying to find somebody on a passenger list. The problem with that is my ancestor, for example, and we'll look at him here in a minute, is John O'Brien. And even though I have an idea of when he may have immigrated, if he was an immigrant, there are hundreds of them. And so naturalization paperwork, which is often filed at a county level in a county courthouse, that paperwork, very often, I can tell this is my person. And then sometimes it'll list the date, the ship, and the port that they arrived on. So I always try to do naturalization work before I do immigration work. So the order of this list, to me, is also important, not just what's on the list. Next, I have a series of records that very often get overlooked, especially by new genealogists, and yet these are the kinds of records that really start to bring this person to life. Sometimes, however, they're the very records that we need because those birth, marriage, and death records aren't available. So we have things like city directories, and those city directories date back into the early 1800s. We have tax rolls. Depending on the law of the time, you can usually, if you follow tax rolls year after year after year, and then all of a sudden a man shows up on a tax roll, that tells you that he either just turned 21 or that he just moved into that area. So if you can't find him elsewhere where you think he might be, that's a clue to his birth year, right? So there's tax rolls are used for a lot of other things, but that is one of the purposes of tax rolls, is to help pinpoint a birth year. Land records. Land records are so valuable. And even if your family, even if you think they were dirt poor, right? And that phrase always cracks me up. But even if you think they were poor, they may have owned some land. And that land could lead you to clues about family structure, about births and deaths and marriages. Like, land records are fantastic. Wills and probate records, again, those are usually county courthouse level records. Those kinds of records are gold mines of information about family structure, about death dates, about locations and residences. There are other court records for our less than savory ancestors. Those are usually a gold mine as well, when you get other kinds of court records. One of my favorite records is county and local histories. Back in 1876, for the centennial of the United States, many towns and counties were asked to or started to put together a local history. And Ancestry has, I think, 20,000 of those local histories that have been digitized and put online. And they'll list the first settlers in the community and who the first school teachers were and who the first ministers of the local congregations were and who the prominent members of the community have been, for 100 or 150 years. And so those are really rich resources. That also means that you need to start thinking laterally. And what that means is a lot of times we get stuck in trying to identify the parents and the parents and the parents. But my grandfather's death certificate might not list his mother's maiden name, because whoever it was that was the informant may have never known her, may not have a clue. But I could look at his brother's death certificate, and it could list the mother's maiden name. And so this similar thing in county and local histories. Don't just look for your ancestor, look for their siblings, look for their nieces and nephews, and very often you'll get contextual history about the family. I've read many biographies in these county and local histories where it says, Judge Thomas Smith, and that he's the subject of the biography, and then it starts with, his grandparents came from County Down, Ireland, and now all of a sudden, even though Judge Thomas Smith is, a cousin on this line, I now know where those grandparents, who happen to be my ancestors, came from in Ireland. And if you've done Irish research, you know how important location is. Another thing I have on my checklist is newspapers. Newspapers are such a rich resource. And even dating back into the 1700s, they're a rich resource. There are times where passenger lists no longer exist, and the only place you're going to find a list of who was on a particular crossing is in a newspaper in one of those port cities. There are times where a death certificate doesn't exist. Either the courthouse burned down or one was never issued for whatever reason, and a newspaper will carry an obituary. There are times where a birth certificate doesn't exist, but a newspaper will carry a little blurb about how the grandparents came from out of town to visit the new baby that was born, and now you have an approximate date and the mother's maiden name all wrapped up in one. So newspapers are a really great resource, not just for the comings and goings and the color and the flavor of the lives of our ancestors, but also sometimes they are the very key to those vital records. Sometimes they are the only clue to those vital dates and events in the lives of our ancestors. Large collection of newspapers on Ancestry.com. There's also a website, newspapers.com, owned by Ancestry, that has additional newspapers. One of my favorite websites is Chronicling America, which is the Library of Congress website. Also has excellent resources there. The good thing about Chronicling America is they'll actually tell you what newspapers have ever even been published. So when you're trying to collect that list of what exists, Chronicling America is a great place to go, and then figuring out where that exists. Is it online? Is it at the local library in the town where my ancestor lived? Does the Library of Congress have a copy? Trying to figure out where a record exists sometimes takes as much research time as actually finding the record once I know where to look. A fun little thing is yearbooks, and I just put that on my list, and I keep it here to remind me. I do a lot of descendancy research, meaning I'll pick an ancestor and trace all their descendants. And so as I start getting into the late 1800s, the early 1900s, I just want to remember to check the yearbooks. If I can have a photograph of this person, that's always a bonus. Next, I go to published family histories, and again, Ancestry has thousands of these available online. Books that were published by families back at the turn of the last century through the 1900s. These books that were lovingly and painstakingly put together by people who dedicated their lives sometimes to tracing their family history. And of course, they're only as accurate, just like any record, only as accurate as the person who put those records together. But sometimes they have the clue or the information that you need to direct you to some of these other original source materials that you might have overlooked or that you might not have realized existed. And then finally on my list here is the online family trees. I put that at the bottom of my list. So it is on my list, first of all. Let me just say that. It is on my list. I do look at other people's family trees. I look at other people's family trees because if I didn't, that I could be accused of source snobbery, and I am certainly not a snob. I also recognize that there is information that other people have that I don't have. Sometimes they are closer to the person or knew the person. Sometimes the family Bible or other family information and documents have been passed down in a particular family where they didn't come down through my family. They may have come through another family. And so I always look at other people's family trees. However, I always look at them last, and I do that intentionally. I do that because I want to go into any research problem with fresh eyes, not with someone else's perspective already in my head. if I started looking at records, if I had already looked at a tree and started looking at records trying to prove someone else or document someone else's research, the problem with that is I'm trying to prove their conclusion rather than coming to my own conclusion. So, for example, they may say that the parents of William Smith are John Smith and Anne. And I may say, okay, great, I'm going to go prove that. And I may find a William Smith on a census record with parents John and Anne and think, great, here's the documentation to prove that person correct. Problem is, what if there are 6 William Smiths born in the same time period in the same place? Why is their conclusion correct? And am I going to overlook the other 5 Williams and just discount them because this other person had John and Anne in their tree as the parents? So I'm really, really careful. Like, I do use other people's trees. Absolutely. I think that they are a gold mine of information, but I always do my own research first, just because I don't want to cloud my perception, and because I really want to climb my own tree. Like, I want to make sure that I'm finding my own ancestors, not somebody else's that I'm grafting into my tree. So as we get ready to wrap up here, let me just show you a working copy of this same document so that you get an idea for how so this is just like a blank checklist, and I keep a copy of this blank checklist, and then when I'm ready to actually use it, I will just create a copy here, right? You can just create a copy, and then I will start to fill it in. So here is the same checklist for this brick wall ancestor of mine. So some of you know I've talked about this guy before. Let me make this just a smidge bigger for you. I've talked about this guy before. So this is John O'Brien. He's my great-great-grandfather. He's my most recent brick wall. John O'Brien was born sometime between 1830 and 1844. And the reason that date range is so big is because of some of the records that we found. We have death records, including an obituary and a funeral notice and a death certificate. So 3 separate death records. And they all say he was 99 years old when he died in 1929. That, of course, means he would have been born in 1830. However, if you look at census records, you'll see his age varies up to as much as 1844. Now, he was also born in either Ireland or Ohio. His census records all say Ohio, with his father born in Ireland, but his military record actually says he was born in Ireland. So there's some confusion there about when and where he was born. We do know he died in 1929 in Arkansas. So I just put what I know up here at the top of the page, and then here you're going to see I include my research questions, and I've written them down. So when and where was John O'Brien born is I want to see if I can tighten that up and get more specific. Sometimes you can't get more specific than a year. Sometimes it just doesn't happen. But I can, I hope, get more specific than Ireland or Ohio. So that's the first question I want to solve. And then I'm hoping that in the process of solving that particular question, I will also discover who the parents are of John O'Brien. So those are my research questions. And now what you'll see here is I have my checklist just run down the side of the page here, and I have started to fill it in. So I have talked to my family, and I just made a note over here that my mom actually has a copy of John O'Brien's military discharge papers when he was discharged from the Civil War. And so that's where some of this information came from, and I need to get a copy of that so that I can look at it for myself, so that I can evaluate it, see if she missed anything, and also just so that I can have a copy for my files. Then I did, doing my federal census work, right? So what I did is I just added lines, and I created a little tick mark or a little line here for each census that I should find him in. I've found him in 3 of the censuses so far. Now, I have found people named John O'Brien in these other censuses, and their age range fits and their birthplaces fit. Okay, but there are too many of them for me to be certain which one is him. And so I still have some more work to do to narrow down which John O'Brien is really him in the 1870, 60, and 50 censuses. And then I just can't find him in the 1920 census. He should be in Arkansas. I need to maybe spend a little more time searching. Now, I have not yet looked at state censuses, so I've just made a note here for myself and highlighted it. Are there state censuses for Ohio or Arkansas? So I need to go check and see, is there a state census during his lifetime that was taken in either of those states, and do those censuses still exist, and where? And once I know that information, I'll just add a couple more lines and make a note that I need to go find him in this census in this time period. Birth records, I need to go look and see if birth records exist, but until I know more specifically where in Ohio, I'm probably not going to find. So if he was born in Ohio, I'll probably need to know either the town or the county, because it's very unlikely, as a matter of fact, I know it's not the case, Ohio, the state, did not keep birth records this early. So I'm going to have to know more specifically where in Ohio or where in Ireland he happens to be from. Now, I have found his marriage record in 1885 in Washington County, Arkansas, and there's a little note about the record. I do have copies of his obituary and his funeral notice and his death certificate. If you scroll down here, I do know he served in the Civil War. He served as a Union soldier according to his obituary. And again, I just made a note that my mom has those discharge papers, and I need to know he was in the Union. And Arkansas did have a few Union troops, so he could have served in Arkansas for the Union, but he may have served for Ohio. And that might get me closer to knowing specifically where in Ohio. If I can find out where he enlisted, then I might know where he was living in 1860, and maybe he's living with his parents, and then I have that information. So all of this is just designed to get me closer to the information that I need. And then I've just made another note here that I need to look for a probate record in Washington County, Arkansas. I've never actually looked at his probate file to see if it has any additional information. Maybe that will be clues to if he has siblings or other people in his family that I need to be aware of that will help get me closer to his nativity and to his parents, which, if you remember, are the research questions that I'm trying to solve. So that's how I use my source checklist. You see down here, I've got one for the UK as well. I also have one in a separate spreadsheet that I use for several Eastern European countries, where I've made notes of what kinds of records exist in some of those places, because I can't keep those as straight in my head as I can keep US records. Like for me, it's really easy to say, oh, I know US has a 72-year privacy law on census, for example. I can't do that for Russia or Poland or Ukraine. I don't know off the top of my head what records exist. So I have a much more extensive spreadsheet that I've created for that. So again, my purpose today was not to get you to copy what I do, but just to give you an idea of one way in which you might be able to organize and focus your research a little bit better so that you can answer your own genealogy questions, and more importantly than ever, make sure that you're climbing your own family tree. Make sure that you're attaching the right records to the right people. Make sure that you're attaching the right parents to the right children. No better way to honor your ancestors than to make sure that you're really looking at your ancestors and not somebody else's. That's all I have for you today. Again, if you're watching this live, I will be on chat in just a few minutes to answer any additional questions you might have. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.